Hi, Year 12. This is just going to be a short presentation on looking at Agrippina the Younger's ambitions and marriages, which falls underneath the dot point of the syllabus, background and rise to prominence. Now, this is just something to think about when writing about marriages. Not that you have to do this, but I think it's a sophisticated way to do it, but it also gives you some structure to make judgments and show cause and effect in relationships with. Now, when writing about marriages, I highly recommend you write about ambitions and vice versa. And this presentation is going to go through some of the ambitions Agrippina had, then looking at her marriages and how they link up together. And it might be a really easy way for you to write about two parts of her life. So what's really important here is that when we look at Agrippina's ambitions, they're quite contradictory. And knowing that there's some nuance there is really, really key. So on one hand, you have Agrippina's family background, her status, as well as her gender, which means that she had a bit of a fixed ambition, a strong ambition to produce offspring, particularly a male, in the hope of making him emperor. That's a fixed ambition that is contextual to that time and to her position in the imperial family. On the other hand, Agrippina's ambitions were also fluid to the influence and context of the time, and we're going to look at that in a moment. So four kind of key ambitions that some say stay there the whole time, some change, are the following. Firstly, an ambition of Agrippina's is to survive the persecution of Tiberius. A really strong one is to produce offspring, especially a male. A key one that holds throughout her life is to have social, economic, and political security. They may not all happen at the same time, but it's a general one that you can refer back to. And lastly, a key ambition of Agrippina, once she did have her son, was to promote her bloodline. So looking at her first marriage, it occurred while her mother, Agrippina the Elder, was under house arrest, when Emperor Tiberius organized for the 13-year-old Agrippina to marry the 30-year-old Gaius Domitius Ahenobarbus. Tacitus states, Tiberius personally entrusted his grandchild Agrippina to Ahenobarbus. He also claims Domitius was a man of ancient family and a blood relation to the Caesars. This marriage lasted from 28 CE to 40 CE, and from that marriage there was one child, a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who later became known as Nero. In regard to Ahenobarbus, Tacitus states that he was, quote, a man of noble birth but violent and cruel character, while Suetonius stated, though of good lineage, was a man of foul temper. Surprisingly, the ancient accounts are supported in a fashion by contemporary writing. Anthony Barrett claims Agrippina's marriage to Domitius was politically advantageous but personally difficult. On the other hand, Barbara Levick asserts that the union produced Nero, whose later rise hinged on Agrippina's relentless promotion of her bloodline. So thinking about that first marriage, what ambitions that we looked at the start of this presentation were achieved through it? The first one is that it allowed Agrippina to survive the persecution of Tiberius by aligning herself through marriage to Ahenobarbus, who came from an ancient and noble family, made it very difficult for Tiberius, despite his great power at the time, to just openly persecute Agrippina, the way that he did to her brothers and her mother. It also produced offspring. It produced her son Lucius, which was extremely important for her at this time. And lastly, this marriage to Ahenobarbus, although difficult, as some historians accounted for, did provide Agrippina social, economic, and political security. Moving on from Ahenobarbus, we now move on to Crispus. Suetonius, the ancient writer, asserts that Emperor Claudius, once taking power, encouraged Gaius Sallustius Pescennius Crispus to divorce his wife and marry Agrippina. The reason for this comes from Cassius Dio. Cassius Dio suggests that Claudius bringing Agrippina out of exile, who was exiled by her brother, Gaius, the emperor at the time, and reinstating her son Lucius's inheritance, which was taken away by Gaius, the previous emperor, was an attempt to restore the appearance of respectability to the imperial family. This is really important to note because this shows how important Agrippina's family background is to her position and influence at this time. This marriage with Crispus lasted from 41 CE to 47 CE, and there were no children from it. Anthony Barrett states the marriage to Crispus, who was immensely wealthy and politically distinguished, offered Agrippina both security and influence at a time when her fortunes were uncertain. Miriam Griffin also asserts that Agrippina's marriage to Passienus Crispus should be seen less as a romantic union than a pragmatic alignment with a man whose wealth and status could bolster her position. Agrippina, the murderer. Now the question mark and inverted commas there are there for a purpose. Popular history would suggest that the most notable thing about Agrippina the Younger is her being a murderer of two of her husbands. But we need to look at this with a really balanced lens. Now, ancient sources, notably Tacitus and Suetonius, suggest that Agrippina may have poisoned Crispus to inherit his fortune. However, modern historians approach this claim critically. Judith Ginsburg states that the accusation of murder reflects more the genre conventions of Roman historiography than a verifiable fact. Yet the inheritance of Crispus's wealth undoubtedly elevated Agrippina's standing and financial independence. So what ambitions are achieved through the second marriage? The main one here is social, economic, and political security. And Anthony Barrett phrased it so well that during a time when things were so uncertain for Agrippina, this marriage to Crispus, although not a great romantic union, was extremely stable for her and provided her security when things were very uncertain. And lastly, we have the third marriage to her uncle Emperor Claudius in 49 CE. The marriage lasted until Claudius's death in 54 CE, and this marriage was highly controversial due to the taboo nature of uncle-niece relationships in Rome. In response to this marriage, the ancient sources focus strongly on the political maneuvering of Agrippina to secure her marriage with the emperor, and then convince him to adopt her son. Tacitus states, Claudius was won over by the persistent pursuit of Agrippina, who sought marriage not only for personal ambition, but also to place her son Nero in the line of succession. Suetonius claims that Claudius married his niece Agrippina, a woman of great ambition and cunning, despite the scandal this caused, and made Nero his heir, bypassing his own son Britannicus. Cassius Dio reports similarly, stating that Agrippina resolved to seize power, persuaded Claudius to marry her, even though he was considered incestuous, and she succeeded in securing the adoption of her son Nero. You can already see from these ancient writings that an ambition of Agrippina's, which has not popped up yet in this presentation, is being secured here. From more contemporary writers, Levick states that Agrippina's marriage to Claudius marks a turning point, where the emperor's reign became overshadowed by her influence. Her primary objective was to secure Nero's succession, manipulating Claudius effectively. Anthony Barrett supports Levick's claims by asserting that Agrippina's ascent through marriage to Claudius was unprecedented in its brazenness, blending familial ties and political savvy to outmaneuver rivals and secure Nero's future. Now, the same question, Agrippina and the murder. Ancient sources mostly report the same information. Tacitus states that it was widely believed that Agrippina administered poison to Claudius. On the other hand, Cassius Dio suggests that there were rumors that Agrippina had poisoned Claudius with mushrooms. However, modern historians are more cautious in making open claims. Barbara Levick claims that while ancient sources hint at Agrippina's involvement in Claudius's death, modern historians recognize the difficulty in separating rumor from fact. The suddenness of Claudius's demise and Nero's swift ascension suggest possible foul play, yet direct evidence is lacking. While Anthony Barrett argues that Agrippina's reputation as a poisoner largely stems from political propaganda by later historians. So in regards to this third marriage, what ambitions are achieved? Firstly, great social, economic, and political security is achieved, especially through political means when we look at patronage in the next dash point. But the big one here is that she promotes her bloodline. When she has Nero adopted by Claudius, and he is essentially put in place to be the next emperor, and without them knowing, the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian family, she has secured her bloodline to continue. So I hope this has been helpful. And if you're ever going to write about ambitions, you can link it to marriages, or vice versa. If you're going to write marriages, you can link them to different ambitions Agrippina had. I hope this has been helpful.